I want to tell you a true story about a Filipino man, some lonely islands, and how his dream helped redraw a part of the map of the Philippines. Our story begins after World War II. The Philippines was a young country rebuilding from war, and the sea was one of its greatest sources of life. Fishing meant food, jobs, and hope. In this time lived a Filipino named Tomas Cloma. He was not a president, not a general, and not a king. He was a fisherman, a businessman, and a lover of the sea. He helped found a school for sailors because he believed that the future of many Filipinos was out there, on the waves, not just on land. But like any businessman of the sea, he had a problem. The usual fishing grounds were crowded and overused. He needed new areas where his boats could catch more fish. At that time, bird droppings or guano were also very valuable as natural fertilizer. So he was interested not just in the water, but also in remote islands where birds might have lived undisturbed for many years. More fish meant more food and income. More guano meant better harvests. For him, the ocean was a place of opportunity. So he did something bold. He sent his ships farther than before, away from the usual routes, deeper into the West Philippine Sea. His crews were Filipino sailors used to tough conditions. They sailed into an area where few people went, searching for new fishing grounds and any forgotten islands that might exist beyond the horizon. Out there, in the middle of the sea, his men started to find them. Small pieces of land, tiny islands, reefs just barely above water, sandbars that disappeared at high tide and appeared again when the water went down. Many of these places had no trees, no villages, and no signs of people living there. From the point of view of Cloma and his men, these islands looked empty and uninhabited. They seemed to be places that no one had taken care of, no one had settled, and no one had clearly claimed as part of their country. For most people, these islands would have been useless, too small, too far, too harsh. But for someone like Tomas Cloma, they were something else. They were a chance for more fish, more guano, and more space for Filipinos in the sea. Over the years after 1947, his ships kept returning. They fished in the rich waters, landed on the reefs and islets, and slowly learned the shape of this scattered group of islands. As time passed, Cloma's idea grew bigger. In international law, there is a concept called terra nullius, meaning land that belongs to no one. If land truly has no owner and no state is actually controlling it, then someone who goes there, occupies it, and declares it might have a legal basis to claim it. From Cloma's perspective, these tiny islands were exactly that. Unoccupied, not clearly under the control of any government, and left alone in the middle of the ocean. For many years, he was just exploring and using the area. But then he decided that this was not enough. He did not just want to fish there, he wanted to claim it. On May 11th, 1956, he took a step that would make him famous and controversial. With around 40 of his men, he sailed back to these islands and openly declared that he was taking possession of them. He called this new territory the Free Territory of Freedomland. The name itself shows what he had in mind: a place of freedom, a place separate from other powers, a place where Filipinos could have their own space in the sea. To make his claim public, he issued a notice to the world saying that he had found and occupied these islands. He treated them as land that did not belong to anyone else. And by being the first to use and take care of them, he believed they were now his territory. He and his group tried to set up a basic presence on some of the islands. There were small shelters and outposts for his crew. He even tried to organize a kind of small government for Freedomland and talked about it becoming some sort of protectorate under the Philippines. For one private citizen, this was a very big move. Of course, if you suddenly say, "I discovered a new territory in the sea and it is mine," other countries will pay attention. The area that Cloma was claiming was not just any patch of water. It was located in what many people know today as part of the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. This region is full of fish, close to important shipping lanes where many ships pass, and many believe it may have oil and gas under the seabed. For countries nearby, it is a very strategic place. So while Clomas saw empty islands and new opportunities, other governments had their own views. Some other states already had historical claims in the broader Spratly area or believed they did. They did not accept the idea that this area was simply free for a private Filipino to claim. From that point on, Freedomland was not just a dream. It was part of a larger and sensitive regional dispute. Years passed. The Philippines itself was changing. By the 1970s, Ferdinand Marcos was president, and the country was under martial law. The Philippines began to pay more attention to the islands in the West Philippine Sea. The government realized that the group of islands and reefs that Cloma had claimed could be important to national security and the economy. It was no longer just about one fisherman's dream. It was about territory, resources, and the country's position in the region. From the Philippine government's point of view, a private individual, Tomas Cloma, had claimed a territory that lay in a strategically vital part of the sea. If the Philippines wanted to use his claim as a basis for a state claim, the government needed those rights to be clearly in the hands of the Republic, not in the hands of one man. It had to be turned from a private claim into a national one. This is where the story becomes darker and more dramatic. In the mid-1970s, under martial law, it is widely said that Cloma was arrested or detained. Accounts describe that he was accused of usurpation of authority, partly because he called himself admiral of his own navy. The important detail is what happened after. He signed a document called a deed of assignment. In that deed of assignment, Tomas Cloma gave up all his rights and claims over Freedomland to the Philippine government. In simple terms, he said, "Everything I claimed there, I now turn over to the Republic of the Philippines." For this, he was paid only 1 Philippine peso. Yes, the price often mentioned in accounts of this story is exactly 1 peso, one coin for an entire claimed territory in the sea. It is hard not to react to that. 1 peso for Freedomland? On paper, it looks like almost nothing. But this was happening under a strong authoritarian government, in a time when saying no could have serious consequences. There was pressure. At the same time, you could also say that in the end, Cloma's dream moved from being a private fantasy to becoming part of his own country's official territory. For some, that shows that despite what he had to sacrifice, he remained loyal to the Philippines. Once Cloma had signed away his rights, the path was open for the Marcos government to act. And it did. On June 11, 1978, President Ferdinand Marcos signed Presidential Decree Number 1596. This legal document drew a set of boundaries in the sea and declared that a certain area, including many of the islands and reefs that Cloma had explored and claimed, would now be known as the Kalayaan Island Group and would be part of Philippine territory. The decree did more than just claim the area on paper. It also said that this area would become a separate municipality under the province of Palawan. In other words, not just lines on a map, but a local government unit with its own officials connected to the Philippine system. That municipality was given a new name, Kalayaan. The choice of name is important. Kalayaan is the Filipino word for freedom. In a way, this was the state version of Cloma's original Freedomland. Before, it was a private Freedomland of one bold seafarer. Now, it was Kalayaan, a formal part of the Republic of the Philippines. The spirit of the name stayed the same, but the ownership became national. From that moment, the Kalayaan Island Group, or KIG, became an official part of how the Philippines sees its territory in the West Philippine Sea. The government has argued that these islands are vital for national security and survival, pointing to their resources, their location, and their role in protecting the country's maritime space. At the same time, other countries in the region have their own claims and do not fully agree. This is why the area remains a sensitive and sometimes tense region even today. But if we come back to the human story, it all began with something very simple. A Filipino man needed new fish and new opportunities. He pushed his ships further than most people at the time. He found scattered islands and reefs that many had ignored. He saw them as land that did not clearly belong to anyone. He imagined them as a new territory, Freedomland, that could give Filipinos more space and more chances in the sea. Later, that same man signed away his claim for a single peso under pressure so that the Philippine government could turn his private dream into an official part of the country. Decades later, those islands are still the subject of diplomatic talks, patrols, and debates. But behind all the headlines and legal arguments, there is still that one story. A fisherman entrepreneur, 40 men, some tiny islands, and a big idea. The Kalayaan Island Group today is not just a cluster of dots on a map. It is a symbol of how one person's actions, however imperfect, can influence national policy. It reminds us that sometimes history is not only made by presidents, generals, or giant empires. Sometimes it is made by someone who simply looks at the sea, sees a possibility no one else noticed, and decides to act. So when you hear about disputes in the West Philippine Sea or see the name Kalayaan Island Group, remember the journey of Tomas Cloma and his Freedomland. Remember that behind the legal terms in the political speeches, there was once a Filipino sailor looking for fish and fertilizer who ended up changing how his country looks at a part of the ocean it now calls its own.